should be introduced and rigidly enforced, it might cause despair by creating the fear of further changes in a similar direction. If, however, they are made with a tendency to subsequent leniency, then it might be said that we have recognized our mistakes, which would undermine the faith of the infallibility of the new authority. It might also be said that we were frightened and that we were forced to make concessions for which nobody would be thankful, since they would be considered as legitimately due. Any of these impressions would be detrimental to the prestige of the new Constitution. It is necessary for us that from the first moment of its proclamation, when the people are still dumbfounded by the accomplished revolution and are in a state of terror and surprise, they should realize we are so strong, so invulnerable, and so mighty that we shall in no case pay attention to them, and not only will we ignore their opinions and desires, but be ready to and capable of suppressing at any moment or place any sign of opposition with indisputable authority. We shall want the people to realize that we have taken at once everything we wanted, and that we shall under no circumstance share our power with them. Then they will close their eyes to everything out of fear and wait further developments. The Goyas are like a flock of sheep. We are wolves. Do you know what happens to sheep when wolves get into the fold? They will also close their eyes to everything, because we will promise to return to them all their liberties after the enemies of peace have been subjugated and all the parties pacified. Is it necessary to say how long they would have to wait for the return of their liberties? Why have we conceived and inspired this policy without giving them an opportunity to examine its inner meaning, if not for the purpose of attaining by a circuitous method what is unattainable for our scattered race by a direct road? This constituted a base for our organization of secret masonry, which is not known to and whose aims are not even suspected by these cattle, the Goys. They have been decoyed by us into our numerous, ostensible organizations, which appear to be Masonic lodges, so as to divert the attention of their co-religionists. God has given us, His chosen people, the power to scatter, and what to all appears to be our weakness has proved to be our strength, and has now brought us to the threshold of universal rule. Little remains to be built on these foundations. Protocol number 12. The word liberty can be differently interpreted. We will define it as follows. Liberty is the right to do that which is permitted by law. Such a definition of this word will eventually serve us, because liberty will be in our power, and also because the laws will either destroy or construct only what we desire in accordance with the above-mentioned program. We will deal with the press in the following manner. What is the present role of the press? It serves to arouse furious passions or egotistic party dissensions which may be necessary for our purpose. It is empty, unjust, inaccurate, and most people do not understand what end it serves. We will shackle it and keep a tight rein on it. We will also do the same with other printed matter. For what use would it be for us to rid ourselves of attack on the part of the periodical press if we remain open to criticism through pamphlets and books? We will convert the products of publicity, now so extensive, owing to the need of censorship, into a source of income for our state. We will impose a special stamp tax. When a newspaper printing shop is started, bonds will have to be deposited, which will guarantee our government from all attacks on the part of the press. In case of an attack, we will mercilessly impose fines. Such measures as stamps, bonds, and fines, the payment of which is guaranteed by the bonds, will bring a huge income to the government. It is true that party papers might not fear the loss of money, so we will suppress these after the second attack on us. No one shall touch the prestige of our political infallibility, and the pretext for stopping a publication will be that the publication in question excites public opinion without cause or reason. I ask you to bear in mind that among those who attacked us there will be also organs established by us, but they will attack exclusively those points which we plan to change. No, not one notice will be made public without our control. This is already being done by us. since the news from all parts of the world is received through several agencies in which it is centralized. These agencies will then be completely in our power, and they will publish only such news as we will permit. If we have already managed to subjugate the minds of the Goys to such an extent that almost all of them see world events through colored glasses which we put over their eyes, if even at present there is not one state which bars our access to state secrets, so termed by the stupid Goys, then what will it be when we, in the person of our universal sovereign, are the recognized rulers of the world? Let us return to the future of the press. Anybody who wishes to become an editor, a librarian, or a printer will be obliged to obtain a diploma, which in case of disobedience will be immediately revoked. With such measures, thought will become an educational instrument in the hands of our government, which will not allow the people to be led astray into realms of fancy and dreams about beneficent progress. Who of us does not know that these fantastic blessings are the direct road to baseless hopes, which lead to anarchistic relations between the people and the government? Progress, or better still, the idea of progress, had led to the creation of different modes of emancipation without setting any limit to it. All so-called liberals are essentially anarchists in thought, if not in action. Each one of them pursues the phantom of liberty, becoming self-willed, that is to say, falling into a state of anarchy by protesting for the mere sake of protesting. We will now again refer to the question of the press. We will place stamp taxes secured by bonds on each page of all printed matter, while on books containing less than 480 pages we will place a double tax. We will classify them as pamphlets so as to lessen the number of magazines which represent the worst printed poison, and on the other hand, to force writers to prepare such long works that they will be little read, especially as they will be expensive. Our own publications, guiding public opinion in the direction we desire, will be cheap and rapidly bought. The tax will discourage the writing of mere leisure literature, whereas punishment will make the writers dependent upon us. Even if there were writers who would like to attack us, they would find no publishers for their works. Before printing any work, the editor or printer will have to apply to the authorities for permission. We will then know beforehand of the attacks that are being prepared against us, and we will destroy them by coming out with advanced statements on the subject. Literature and journalism are the two most important educational forces. For this reason, our government will become the owner of most of the periodicals. This will neutralize the injurious influence of the private press and have great influence on the people. If we permit 10 periodicals, we ourselves will print 30, and so forth. This, however, must not be suspected by the public. All the periodicals published by us will seem to be of contradictory views and opinions, inviting trust in us, thus attracting to us unsuspecting enemies, and in this way they will be caught in our trap and made harmless. The predominant place will be held by periodicals. They will always stand guard over our interest, and consequently their influence will be comparatively limited. In the second category, we will place semi-official organs, whose aim will be to attract the indifferent and little interested. The third category will be our ostensible opposition, which at least in one of its publications will represent the opposition to us. Our real enemies will mistake this seeming opposition as belonging to their own group and will thus show us their cards. All our newspapers will represent different tendencies, namely aristocratic, republican, revolutionary, even anarchistic, so long, of course, as the Constitution lasts. Like the Indian god Vishnu, these periodicals will have 100 arms, each of which will reach the pulse of every group of public opinion. When the pulse beats faster, these arms will guide opinion toward our aims, since the excited person loses the power of reasoning and is easily led. Those fools who believe that they repeat the opinions expressed by the newspapers of their party will be repeating our opinions or those which we desire them to have. Imagining that they are following the press of their party, they will follow the flag which we will fly for them. In order that our newspaper militia may carry out our program, we must organize the press with great care. Under the title of the Central Department of the Press, we will organize literary meetings at which our agents unnoticed will give the passwords and countersigns. Discussing and contradicting our policies, although always superficially, without touching their essence, our press will conduct an empty fire against official newspapers so as to give us only an opportunity to express ourselves in greater detail than we were able to in our preliminary declarations. This, of course, will be done when it is useful to us. These attacks against us will also seem to convince the people that complete liberty of the press still exists, and it will give our agents the opportunity to declare that the papers opposing us are mere windbags, since they are unable to find any real ground to refute our orders. Such measures, which will escape the notice of the public attention, will be the most successful means of guiding the public mind and of inspiring confidence in our government. Thanks to them, we will, as the need arises, excite or pacify the public mind on political questions. We will be able to persuade or confuse them, sometimes lies, referring to facts or contradicting them according to the way they are received by the public, always carefully sounding the ground before stepping on it. We will surely conquer our enemies, because they will not have the press at their disposal in which to express themselves in full. With the above-mentioned plans against the press, we will not even need to refute them seriously. The trial balloon thrown out by us in the third category of our press, we will deny energetically in case of need in our semi-official organs. In French journalism, there already exists the Masonic solidarity of a password. All organs of the press are bound by professional secrecy. Like the ancient augurs, not one member will disclose his secret if he is not ordered to do so. Not one journalist will dare to disclose this secret, for not one of them is admitted to literary headquarters unless he has a disgraceful action in his past record. The fact would immediately be made public. While these disgraceful actions are known only to a few, the prestige of the journalist attracts opinion throughout the country. He is admired. Our plans must extend chiefly to the provincial district. There we must excite hopes and ambitions opposed to those of the capital, by means of which we may always attack them, preventing such ambitions to the capitals as respect of all parties, of all shades of opinion, and we will provide our orators with the same aspect, and they will talk so much that they will exhaust the people by their speeches and cause them to turn away from orators in disgust. To control public opinion, it is necessary to perplex it by the expression of numerous contradictory opinions until the goers get lost in the labyrinth and come to understand that it is best to have no opinion on political questions. Such questions are not intended to be understood by the people, since only he who rules knows them. This is the first secret. The second secret necessary for the success of governing consists in so multiplying popular failings, habits, passions, and conventional laws that no one will be able to disentangle himself in the chaos, and consequently people will cease to understand each other. This measure will help us to sow dissension within all parties, to disintegrate all those collective forces which still do not wish to subjugate themselves to us, to discourage all individual initiative which might be in any degree hamper our work. There is nothing more dangerous than individual initiative. If it has a touch of genius, it can accomplish more than 1 million people among whom we have sown dissensions. We must direct the education of the Goy societies so that their arms will drop hopelessly when they face every task where initiative from individual freedom of action dissipates its force when it encounters another person's freedom. This results in heavy blows at morale, disappointments, and failures. We will so tire the Goys by all this that we will force them to offer us an international power, which by its position will enable us conveniently to absorb without destroying all governmental forces of the world, and thus to form a super government. In lieu of modern rulers, we will place a monster which will be called the supergovernmental administration. Its hands will be stretched out like pincers in every direction, so that this colossal organization cannot fail to conquer all the peoples. Protocol number 6. We will soon begin to establish great monopolies, reservoirs of huge wealth, upon which even the large fortunes of the Goys will depend to such an extent that they will be drowned, together with the governmental credits, on the day following the political catastrophe. You economists here present will please carefully weigh the significance of this scheme. We must develop by all means the importance of our supergovernment by representing it as the protector and reward giver of all who willingly submit to us. The aristocracy of the Goys as a political force is dead. We do not need to take it into consideration, but as landowners they are harmful to us because they can be independent in their resources of life. For this reason we must deprive them of their land at any cost. To attain this object, the best method is to increase land taxes, the indebtedness of the land. These measures will keep land ownership in subjection. The aristocracy of the Gentiles, or Goys, which as a matter of heredity is unable to be satisfied with small things, will soon be ruined. At the same time, it is necessary to patronize trade and industry vigorously, and more important, to encourage speculation, whose function is to act as a counterbalance to industry. Without speculation, industry will increase private capital and tend to amelioration of land ownership by freeing it from indebtedness created by the loans granted by agricultural banks. It is necessary that industry should suck out of the land both labor and capital, and through speculation deliver into our hands all the money of the world, thus throwing all the Goys into the ranks of the proletarians. Then the Goys will bow before us in order to obtain the mere right of existence. To destroy Goy industry, we will create among the Goys, as an aid to speculation, the strong demand for boundless luxury which we have already developed. Let us raise wages, which, however, will be of no benefit to the workers, for we will simultaneously cause the rise in prices of objects of first necessity, under the pretext that this is due to the decadence of agriculture and of the cattle industry. We will also artfully and deeply undermine the sources of production by teaching the workmen anarchy and the use of alcohol, at the same time taking measures to expel all the intelligent Goys from the land. That the true situation should not be noticed by the Goys until the proper time, we will mask it by a pretended desire to help the working classes and great economic principles, an active propaganda of which principles is being carried on through the dissemination of our economic theories. Protocol number 7. The intensification of armament and the increase of the police force are essential to the realization of above-mentioned plans. It is necessary that there should be, besides ourselves in all countries, only the mass of the proletariat, a few millionaires devoted to us, policemen and soldiers. We must create unrest, dissensions, and hatred throughout Europe and through the European affiliations, also on other continents. In this, there is a twofold advantage. First, we will hold all countries under our influence, since they will realize that we have the power to create disorders or to restore order whenever we wish. All countries have come to regard us as a necessary burden. Second, we will entangle by intrigue all the threads stretched by us into all the governmental bodies by means of politics, economic treaties, or financial obligations. To attain these ends, we will worm our way into parleys and negotiation. Armed with cunning, but in so-called official language, we will assume the opposite tactics of seeming honest and reasonable. In this way, the peoples and the governments of the Goys, taught by us to regard only the surface of that which we show them, will look upon us as benefactors and saviors of mankind. We must be able to overcome all opposition by provoking a war by the neighbors of that country which dares to oppose us. Should, however, those neighbors in their turn decide to unite against us, we must respond by a world war. Chief success in politics lies in the secrecy of its undertakings. there must be inconsistency between the words and actions of diplomats. We must influence the Goy governments to action beneficial to our broadly conceived plan, now approaching its triumphant goal, creating the impression that such action is demanded by public opinion, which in reality is secretly organized by us with the help of the so-called great power, namely the press. The latter, however, with few exceptions that need not be considered, is already entirely in our hands. In short, to sum up our system of shackling the Goy governments of Europe, we will show our power to one of them by assassination and terrorism, and should there be a possibility of all of them rising against us, we will answer them with American, Chinese, or Japanese guns. Protocol number 8. We must provide ourselves with the same arms our enemies can employ against us. We must seek the most subtle expressions and evasions of the legal dictionary to justify those cases in which we will be forced to announce decisions which may seem unnecessarily bold and unjust, for it is important that these decisions should be expressed in terms so forcible that they will appear as the highest moral rules of a legal character. Our government must be surrounded by all the forces of civilization, in the midst of which it will have to function. It will surround itself with publicists, experienced lawyers, administrators, diplomats, and finally people educated along special lines in our special advanced schools. These people will know all the secrets of social existence. They will know all languages composed of political letters and words. They will be familiar with the reverse side of human nature, with all of its sensitive chords, upon which they must know how to play. These chords are the structure of the intellects of the Goys, their tendencies, their failings, their vices, and their virtues, the peculiarities of classes and caste. It is evident that the highly talented members of our government, to which I refer, will be recruited not from the ranks of the Goys, accustomed to promoting their administrative duties without questioning their aim and without thinking why they are necessary. The Goy administrators sign papers without reading them and work for profit or for pride. We will surround our government by a whole world of economists. It is for this reason that economics is the chief science taught by the Jews. We will be surrounded by a crowd of bankers, traders, capitalists, and most important of all, by millionaires, because in essence everything will be decided by a question of figures. Meanwhile, as it is not yet safe to give the responsible government post to our brother Jews, we will give them to people whose record and whose character are such that there is an abyss between them and the people. Also to people for whom, in case of disobedience to our orders, there will remain nothing but condemnation or exile, thus forcing them to protect our interest to their last breath. Protocol number 9. In applying our principles, turn your attention to the character of the people in whose countries you will be resident and among whom you will act. For a general education of them before the re-education of a people according to our plan cannot be successful. But by advancing carefully in their application, you will see that before 10 years have passed, the most obstinate character will have changed, and we can then...
As we continue through our little commentary on the sacrament of baptism, we talked last time about the minister of the sacrament of baptism. Let's say a few words then today about the sponsors who are going to be sponsors for the sacrament of baptism. And this question of sponsors is one which is regarded of being of great importance by the Church, although frequently treated as of little importance by Catholics. And let me quote from the Catechism of the Council of Trent, which reiterates the importance of sponsorship in baptism and points out how little consideration is commonly given to it. To those who administer baptism, another class of persons is to be added. who according to the most ancient practice of the church assist at the baptismal font, who though formerly called by sacred writers by the common name of sponsors or sureties, are now called godfathers and godmothers. As this is an office common almost to all the laity, the pastor will teach his principal duties with care and accuracy. He will in the first instance explain why at baptism, besides those who administer the sacrament, godfathers and godmothers are also required. What's the historical basis of godparents? We find that it's an ancient custom of the church, dates back as far as we can determine it from the 3rd century. We find mention of sponsors. They were sometimes called sponsors at that stage. The term godfather or godmother, patrinus in Latin, dates from about the 8th century. But the fact of sponsors is found in the 3rd century in the writings of Tertullian, and at the end of the 4th century in the writings of St. Augustine. In the beginning, sponsors were only used for adult baptisms. Children, centuries of the church, did not have godparents. The function of godparents was fulfilled by their natural parents. And it was only from the 6th and 7th centuries on that the custom developed of having godparents for children. It started with the case of orphans or the children of slaves who needed somebody who could truly stand for them. And from the earliest that godparents were used for children, then of course they made the responses on their behalf. They answered the interrogations that are part of the ceremony of baptism. Before then, the parents answered on their behalf. So it started though with adult baptisms, and of course in the early centuries, vast majority were adults who were baptized, and they had the obligation of having one sponsor who had to be a godfather. Until the 6th century, godmothers had never been heard of and didn't exist. There are only godfathers, and there's only one. Even for women who were received into the church, there was only a godfather. They had in the early centuries deaconesses who would help in the ceremony of adult baptism with the women who would be then taken into the pool of water, the baptismal font, and so that for the sake of modesty, they had what they called deaconesses who had no sacramental role, but they weren't the godfather, there was a godfather. And in the 6th century, then godmothers were added to the godfathers. Until by the 8th century, that became common practice, universal practice for all children as well as for all adults. What was the function of a sponsor in the early church? First function was to receive the newly baptized person from the hands of the bishop or the priest, coming from the baptismal fonts. And of course, adult baptisms, it was in a font in the special baptistry in the early centuries of the church. So they would take him out and take responsibility for the Catholic life and Catholic education of the person who had just been baptized. So it would be taken from the font, then ongoing education and responsibilities for that soul was exercised. And we'll a little later on look at a quote from St. Augustine in which he indicates the exact, precise responsibilities of godparents that have not changed since the early centuries of the church. From the 8th or 9th century on, the practice developed of having multiple godparents. At first there's only one godfather. From the 6th century, a godmother could be added. Then 8th, 9th, 10th century, they had several godparents until the Council of Trent acknowledged that practice as an abuse. And the Catechism of the Council of Trent explains why that practice was abolished. We'll come to that when we see a little bit about the number of sponsors. But since the Council of Trent, then one or at the most two are allowed. The Catechism of the Council of Trent explains the appropriateness of the practice of having godparents, sponsors for baptism, and explains the appropriateness of it by a comparison. The comparison is made between the sacrament of baptism, which gives spiritual life, and birth, which gives natural life. We can't be born without parents, naturally speaking, so we ought not to be born spiritually without parents in the supernatural order. Hence the role of godparents. Allow me to just quote what the Catechism of the Council of Trent has to say on this subject. The propriety of the practice of godparents will at once appear if we keep in view the nature of baptism, that is, a spiritual regeneration by which we are born children of God. Of which St. Peter says that as newborn infants desire the ration of milk without guile, so therefore as everyone after his birth requires a nurse, an instructor, by whose assistance and assiduity he is brought up and formed to learning and to morality. That's something in the natural order. So those who by the efficacy of the regenerating waters of baptism are born to spiritual life, and that they should be entrusted to the fidelity and the prudence of someone from whom they may imbibe the precepts of the Christian religion and the spirit of Christian piety, and thus grow up gradually in Christ until with the divine assistance they at length arrive at the full growth of perfect manhood. And so the role of the godparent will be then to take care of the newly baptized person, so he gets to learn the precepts of the faith and to practice true piety, and thus to grow in the interior life to the fullness of the interior life. And so we can see why it is that the Church instituted this practice of godparents. It's not, as far as we can gather it, of apostolic origin. It's of ecclesiastic, earliest centuries. 3rd century we can trace it back to. What then are the duties of godparents? And the duties of godparents are clearly defined by the Church. And I would like to quote for that the Catechism of the Council of Trent, as well as the Code of Canon Law, and also the rubrics of the ritual, in which it's in the ritual that we find the ceremony of baptism, and they indicate the duties of sponsors. Allow me to read the text of the ritual, which is the same as Canon 769 of the 1917, the old Code of Canon Law. It is the duty of sponsors, by reason of their position, ever to regard their godchild as a personal charge, and in all that pertains to his Christian upbringing, to watch over him faithfully, so that in his whole life he may prove himself true to the promises which they once solemnly spoke for him. So therefore there is a responsibility of perpetual, for always, regarding the godchild as a responsibility in everything that regards to the Christian life, namely to education as well as to the moral instruction. It's a great responsibility. Allow me to quote what the Catechism of the Council of Trent says, and it points out the importance of the responsibilities of godparents because in that time, in the 16th century,